Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. Today, I feel so lucky to sit down with one of my favorite guests that I have on, and that's Dr. David Martin. And for some reason, the shows I do with him always find this special place in the conversation because we start off at some of the surface things, but then just go deep into the heart of the matter. And what we get into in today's discussion, I found to be arguably one of the most important messages I think we need to hear right now. And it's how to overcome the fear and to see the Great Reset, the New World Order, the coming lockdowns, all this, to see it for what it is. And the way that David describes it and frames it is just incredibly powerful. So I hope that you enjoy this interview. I hope that it's so good that when you finish it, you're going to share it with your friends and your family and all the people you think should see it, because I think it's a message that we need to be focused on right now. And I think it's a very important message in laying the foundation for what we can do to get through this next stage, this next year, and on to the next step of what this country can become, because there's a lot of things that can become, but I think we want to make it the country that we choose to make it and make it become what we want it to become. So anyway, before we get started, make sure you're following me on social media at Man in America. Every show is done as a podcast as well. So if you want to listen instead of watch, just get your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, search for Man in America. You'll find me there. And finally, we're doing a weekly silver giveaway. So every week, we're giving away 5 ounces of pure silver. These are 1 ounce Buffalo rounds. And all you have to do is enter at silverseth.com. That's silverseth.com. If for some reason that URL doesn't work in your browser, you can also go to maninamerica.com/win. So it's maninamerica.com/win as a backup if for some reason SilverSeth doesn't work. But what you do, go on there, put your name, your email, you enter once, and you're re-entered every week to win 5 ounces of free silver, because we just love the Man in America audience and we're just giving away silver. So why not? All right, folks, please enjoy this interview with Dr. David Martin. David, it is such a pleasure and an honor to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
It is indeed a delight, Seth. I enjoy it, and it's wonderful to see you again and see that we're thriving in a time where genuine humanity is flourishing against the backdrop of the compost of the old system. So wonderful to be here.
What a great way of putting it, the compost of the old system. Yeah. So, well, there's always so much that we can talk about, and I think there's so many different areas we could go into and just have hours of conversation. But I first came across you in the original Plandemic movie, and with Mickey Willis and Judy Mikovits, and you were someone that I think had not a crystal ball, but this immense insight into the COVID pandemic and the background, the history, the patents, the goals, the way it was going to be rolled out. And so much of that really proved to be very true. And so here we are, for a lot of people, they're like, oh my goodness, finally we're past the pandemic, until, of all people, Alex Jones, comes out. And again, the hashtag Alex Jones was right. I mean, it's spot on. He comes out. This was released I think last week, where he said, exclusive Biden admin preparing to bring back full COVID restrictions, rollout to begin mid-September. So that story came out. Then we started seeing all kinds of other stories coming out, basically backing up that. We have, Lionsgate now requiring masks and I think even testing. We've got certain colleges now are going back to masks. Natalie Winters, shared this recently on Twitter, where she found that the federal government has already begun buying COVID-19 equipment and hiring consultants to enforce pandemic-era safety protocols. And some of these contracts are scheduled to begin in September and go in October. And I went and looked into some of those, and it's exactly it. So everything points to them, especially heading into an election year, restarting this COVID engine, restarting the fear, the masks, the lockdowns.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this? What are you seeing?
Well, remember that this was a behavior modification exercise in what we're going to call COVID 1.0. If we go back and we look at anthrax 2.0, which was September of 2001, we see that we needed a couple rounds of the fear porn to get people to accept the PrEP Act in 2005, which gave the legislative framework for the way in which the Biden administration is currently planning for lockdown 2.0. This is a very old playbook. I mean, if we go back and we look at how old the playbook is, we can certainly go back and see that these syphilis experiments were what we needed to get everybody addicted to penicillin. We needed the HIV epidemic to get everybody addicted to AZT and very costly medications. We needed to create hyper allergies, food allergies. We needed to create all kinds of other things with environmental toxins so that we could get people addicted to epinephrine pens, which then mysteriously became $40,000 a dose. I mean, it's amazing how this works. We have a pattern that goes back to 1904 when the Japanese figured out that Bacillus thuringiensis was a gut toxin to vertebrates, to humans. And so, not surprisingly, we decided to do what? Use Bacillus thuringiensis to modify all of our seed crops. BT cotton, BT corn, BT soybeans, every single thing you put in your mouth that's not GMO, GMO free certified, every single thing you put in your mouth that has corn syrup in it, that has your tofus and your soy milks and your soy sauces, and every single thing you put in your mouth is actually containing inside of it a toxin that was known in 1904 to create gut problems. And lo and behold, Seth, we have irritable bowel syndrome, and we have dietary issues, and we have heartburn, and we have gut issues, and we have everything. And if we look at this, we got to remember where we are. This is behavior modification exercise. This is not about a pandemic. There is no health emergency. There is no health emergency to be declared. Allegedly, the new variant, which we were supposed to be told is now 26% of the circulating population, the ARS variant, is actually not a variant. It was actually not only planned, but if you look at the clinical trials for the multivalent injection that's currently being developed by Moderna, BioNTech, and Novavax, what you'll see is that in all three of those, the alleged variant, which is the new variant of concern, was known about before the variant of concern even existed, because it actually entered clinical trials before it was in the population. The fact of the matter is, remember, and I've said this many times, there never was a COVID pandemic. There never was a SARS-CoV-2 novel virus. There was never any of those things. This was a behavior modification exercise to fulfill the objective of the financial interests that were being served. And let's remember that the quote, and I keep saying this quote because no one is still admitting that the criminals acknowledge their own crime. Until a pandemic is at emergency threshold, the public doesn't understand the need for medical countermeasures, such as a pan-coronavirus or pan-influenza vaccine. We need the media to create the hype. We need to use that hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will follow if they see profit at the end of the process. That's a quote from Peter Daszak. That's a quote that was made at the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, published in 2015. This is the admission of terrorism again. And what the Biden administration is engaging in is domestic terrorism 2.0. And the reason why is because the Biden administration could have never won an election in an open conversation. No one would have elected him as president. No one would have elected a Democratic ticket if people were not glued to their televisions under lockdowns. The administration of Trump that allowed for those things to happen was administered by who? Anthony Fauci and Alex Azar, treasonous individuals in chief, whose sole purpose was to get people out of public conversation, out of the debates, out of the just random interactions that people have to talk about matters of state. Get people addicted to the TV, get them in front of MSNBC, a criminal co-conspirator, NBC, a criminal co-conspirator, CNN, a criminal co-conspirator, get them in front of the propaganda machine, and lo and behold, you can actually overthrow a government, which is exactly what they want to do in round two. And it turns out that Democrats will win in a state-controlled faux election that has people masked, has people at polls standing 6 feet apart, and has the election process done on digital platforms, which will not and cannot be audited for any authentic performance. So guess what? It's the game plan. And remember, nobody's sick right now. People are actually dying from the effects of the hyperacceleration of cancers from the pseudouridine that was in the shots. People are dying of myocarditis, but nobody's sick right now. So remember, this is domestic terrorism. It is a clear treasonous act by the head of state, which is the reason why in the Constitution we had provisions that said that when the government no longer is in service to the people, we have within our rights to replace the government.
And there's a lot of questions that come up for me with this. So looking at what their behavior modification 2.0, the media, as you mentioned, played a significant role in people's compliance, for the first pandemic. People were genuinely scared. They were concerned. They weren't hugging grandma. They were glued to their TV. They were glued to the CNN death counter, right? Now where we are, a few years later, I'd say that so many people are no longer glued to those same propaganda mouthpieces. There's a lot of people that are watching independent shows. They're watching, Tucker on Twitter. They're watching shows like this. They've removed one of the biggest conduits for population control from their mind. Even with the opening up of discussion on Twitter that's happened that wasn't there back when the pandemic, first pandemic was. So how do you think they're gonna go about this? Because I think that the same playbook probably won't work. Do you think it'll be even
no, and
more
it already
harsh
isn't.
and aggressive? I mean, how they must have anticipated that too.
Yeah. Well, and as you quite correctly point out, I mean, if you look at the number of contracts that were awarded for pandemic preparedness, most of them are behavior modification and compliance contracts. What does that mean? We need to have more thugs who were bullied in school and now have the opportunity to be bullies themselves. We need more thugs to actually be the enforcers of masks and of injection evidence and everything else. We need more enforcers because it turns out that this last terror campaign backfired. If you look at the data, Seth, it's very fascinating. Many parents are now not even giving their children the regular scheduled injections that were once upon a time relatively straightforward and assumed to be safe and effective. And so what's happened is not only have we not succeeded in buying the propaganda, we've actually had the propaganda backfire on itself. We now see the uptake of now over 650 million, and you can do the math on this. There have been 650 something million injections, according to the CDC, in the US alone. But what you see in that 650 million is now on the bivalent, monovalent, and coming up these polyvalent boosters. What you're finding is uptakes that many times in many states are dropping below 10%. Now, remember that Anthony Fauci stated in Congress in 2019, in the first week of December of 2019, Anthony Fauci said that the reason why they were doing this exercise was to get the public to have 100% acceptance of the influenza shot. That's what the official stated congressional hearing message was. Now, it's pretty interesting to recognize that you have Anthony Fauci clearly stating that that is the reason why they were doing the exercise in the first place. But Now we're dealing with a world in which not only did we not take the flu shot, but we're now not taking that, and we are not buying off on this nonsensical booster regime, where at this point in time, if you've been following the recommendations, you're somewhere between 4 and 5 total shots, 2 or 3 boosters. And the bottom line is the public is going, hold on a minute. This thing, which was supposed to prevent infection or prevent transmission, did neither. And even the people who bought off on the propaganda in round 1 went on to get long COVID. The bummer is, if you get a shot, you were coerced into doing it, and you still got the thing that they said this was going to be protected from, it's kind of hard to buy off on the lie the next time around. What does that mean? That means that the draconian lockdown pressures the suppression of freedom of speech, the suppression of freedom of movement has to be scaled up. And not surprisingly, one of the first places they're going to do it is in transportation. TSA is going to be the front line, because it turns out the Department of Homeland Security touches more humans at TSA than any other place. And so TSA is going to be the front line of Terror Battle 2.0. And the fact of the matter is, while it is unfortunate to be sure, the United States is going to be standing much more alone this time, because the rest of the world, in fact, the World Health Organization outright has said, this is not an emergency. This is actually a variant, they say, of concern, but it's not an emergency. And so ironically, this is clear evidence that the United States used this in the first instance to disrupt the electoral process, and they are going to use it again. And the Biden administration can't win on its own. It can't win a fair fight. The Democrats can't win a fair fight. So what do? Change the playing field.
Got a quick message for you. So folks, thank goodness inflation is going down. Thank you, Biden. But wait, if inflation is going down, then why are food prices going up, energy prices going up, and gas prices going up? Well, because they're lying to us. Imagine that. You see, right now, the real rate of inflation is closer to 25%, not the 5% the White House wants you to believe. You can see this with your own eyes and in your own wallet. What this means is that if you had $100,000 in your savings account just 1 year ago, today, it's only worth about $75,000 in terms of your actual buying power. Your money is losing value by the day. If you went back to 1920 and you had a $20 bill or a 1-ounce gold coin, you could walk into a men's clothing store and buy an entire suit, jacket, shoes, pants, belt, everything. But think about it. What would a $20 bill buy you today? Maybe some socks? But an ounce of gold will still buy you that same suit. And this is why I believe that now, more than ever, it's a good time to consider transferring at least a portion of your wealth into physical gold and silver, real world assets that have stood the test of time. And for this, I'm confident in recommending Dr. Kirk Elliott. So Kirk has 2 PhDs and is an incredible Christian patriot who's dedicated to helping you break free from the trap of inflation. You can buy gold and silver directly, even in small amounts, or you can transfer your IRA into physical gold and silver with 0 taxes or penalties. So Kirk is who I use. He's who my family and my friends use. And honestly, he's someone I trust completely. And when it comes to your wealth, you need someone that you can trust. So to learn more, open up a new tab right now and go to goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900 to speak to a real person right now. Kirk Elliott's team will answer all of your questions and take care of you every step of the way. So that's interesting that this is something that, as before, we witnessed, and I think this is the first time for a lot of people, they realized there was some sort of global control mechanism when you had the exact same messaging and requirements and marketing of this whole thing in, United States, Australia, a tiny country in Europe. I mean, it was obvious this whole thing was coordinated. So, so basically, if I'm understanding what you're saying, that let's just say that, the overall plan of Agenda 2030, which is moving towards that, really coming from the Europeans and the bankers and those, kind of globalist organizations, that the United States almost has to accelerate aspects of that plan within our own country, because the people here have to keep themselves in power through 2024.
Correct.
So they're going to be honestly, kind of on their own, which is interesting. That's my first time hearing that.
Yeah. Remember that the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization have no chance of passing their treaty if the Democrats aren't in power.
Ah, okay. So why do you think the
So
WHO wouldn't
we
support?
actually have to have a Democratic victory. Have to. Not close. The Democrats have to win for the United States to cede its sovereignty.
I see. And so how do you see this playing out? Because I'm already seeing, I mean, I was looking at Twitter before our interview, and I think do not comply is trending. I mean, I'm seeing that
Yeah.
there is so much resistance. It really is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Right. And
Right.
so many people I'm seeing there say, I'm never going to wear a mask. I won't mask my children. I won't do this. So as we inch toward 2024, get into 2024, approach the election, I mean, because it seems like the more desperate that these, the deep state, whatever you want to call them, the more they get and the more they push, it's like they've crossed the kind of peak where now as they push harder, it doesn't mean that we get suppressed further. It means that we resist even more. And so where's this going to go?
That's a beautiful question. And Seth, I think that's where, I had what I would call the interregnum of terror campaigns warning that the vast majority of people who said they were at least on to the scam. And it's hard now to even describe, there aren't populations that are somehow dumped into certain buckets. There's not the awakened and the reawakened and the reawakening and the you brand it. I mean, the fact of the matter is there are three populations in America. There are the populations that simply will kneel to whatever autocratic message is put out there. And that group is a group that will be the first in line to roll up their sleeves. They'll be the first in line to wear masks in their cars. They'll be, like my brother, the first to actually lecture behind plexiglass in universities to help terrorize students and in their lecture halls. That group is a group that is going to embrace every single one of the acts of terror as a necessary and expedient evil to reduce the Earth's population, because the same group actually thinks that we have overpopulation, and the same group thinks that we have climate-induced change where we need to shrink the population of the Earth. That group, by the way, is 1/3 of the population. There's another third of the population, which is actually only willing to go along with the racket when the coercion becomes too strong. And that is the people who actually were going to lose their jobs if they didn't get the jab, and they were going to lose their status if they didn't come along with being compliant. They're the silent ones, by the way, who would be more than happy to have me go out on a limb saying the things I was saying. But God help them, they wouldn't share that message because they wouldn't want to be outed as sympathizing to the truth. That middle third is a huge, huge group of people who were coerced into submission. And that may be actions of submission, like taking the shot. It may be acts of omission, like not sharing their sense of what is true and what is right. But that middle third is the third that is going to be the swing vote, because the other third, right? And that third is the third that said, no way in hell, you're not going to modify my genome. And by the way, as much as CDC wants to lie about it, we'd never hit 80% compliant with the injection. Never. At best, if you actually look at any of the data that's out there, at best, we got to 67, 68% maybe. But that means a third of the population said hell no. But here's where that third of the population needs to wake up. And it is not awake, by the way. We should be the ones right now increasing the amplitude and the pressure on school boards and on public officials and on elected officials. And right now, we should be saying, we dare you to bring back a mandate, right? We dare you to bring back a mandate because we are not going to be the agencies of domestic terrorism, and we are not going to watch it happen on our watch. And right now, we've got a bunch of people who have celebrated the victory of coming through COVID-1, and they think that they won. They think it's over. They think they're out of the woods, and they are not. This is an ongoing assault on humanity. And by the way, the baton handoff, and I'm one of the few people who am willing to say this, but the baton handoff that went from COVID to transgender, which is now going to hand the baton back to COVID, is an assault on human dignity. It's an assault on everything that we as people hold dear. Because the fact of the matter is, I was never a hater of any group. I still am not a hater of any group. But I was also not anti-science. I was not anti-anything. I was pro the human experience of life. That's what my life is about. That's what my life has always been about. And the fact of the matter is that whether it's transgender, whether it is, you have to accept the horrific epidemic now of obesity, of chronic disease, and we're supposed to normalize that. We're supposed to normalize gender confusion. We're supposed to normalize these things. Every single one of these, Seth, is to get inside of the brains of human beings and say the world as you know it is no longer in place, and you need to have a paternalistic, draconian, authoritative power structure to bring order into your life. And the answer is you do not. You, as an individual, are fearfully and wonderfully created to be amazing. There is nothing wrong with you. You will never be an asymptomatic spreader of anything but fear. So, don't spread it. Live.
And so, as this progresses, and I have a similar kind of idea about things as well. I'm on the same page as you in thinking that, and I like how you laid it out with, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And I look at it as, it's like, well, what is my job in this battle?
Yeah.
It's my job is to try to get that middle 1/3. Like, I'm the one
That's right.
Like, I'm targeting the swing voters. I don't want to just preach to the choir. The people that know these things are bad, they're not going to comply. It's so that's why I don't come on the show and talk about libtards and the vaccine zombies. It's like, no, that's not going to help anybody. That's just going to push them the opposite way. And so as we enter into 2024 and we see this sway happening, which I was watching Josh Phillip over at Epoch Times recently talking about in one of his reports that the donations to the Democratic Party coming from the individual donors have plummeted. Right, which that's a good indicator that middle third, especially, is really backing away. So I would say that they're going to have to get pretty erratic to be able to control things as we get into the election. So, how do you see that playing out? Do you think that there's any false flags or riots, or like what do you see happening over the next, say, 12 months or so as we approach November of next year?
Well, I think you're already starting to see some of it. You're seeing, and I had a beautiful conversation yesterday with another very, very thoughtful individual who took a while for the analogy to work. But I said, that the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression happened together because industrial agriculture wanted to close down the family farm. Now, that's an objective fact. If you go back and look at it, we didn't have climate change. We had a manufactured financial crisis that did not affect family farms, but was taken from the large corporate banks and infected the family farm banks, which gave rise to the incapacity for farmers to farm. The Dust Bowl was a banking crisis. It was not an environmental crisis. If you look at the bizarre nature right now of the people who are administering the campaign of terror on CO2 emissions, and you're watching them let forest fires be started and burned with impunity, you sit back and go, well, hold on a minute. I thought carbon dioxide was bad. So why are we increasing the carbon dioxide by taking trees out of circulation? Well, the answer is land reappropriation. That's what it's about. It's about reappropriating land. And the best way to reappropriate land is to have a fire. That has been the case since the Old Testament. So this is not a new thing. This has been around for thousands and thousands of years. When humans cannot win on a fair playing field, they use fire. And they use fire to destroy a old appropriation of land and reappropriate it to a new use. There's no question that what is going on in Canada right now is a massive, massive, massive land grab where the state will come in its largesse and propose new development of what? Of things that will be pro-state. That's not a human recovery. And by the way, as much as Maui may or may not be the sum of a series of electrical failures, there is no question that the power systems in Maui were not managed to diminish the risk of fire. We will not say, and I will not say, they necessarily intentionally set them. I'm not going to get into that conversation. What I will say is that very simple safety protocols, like if lines are down, don't send energy back into a down line. Those kinds of things were not done. So were some of those fires, without question, at least negligently set? The answer is without question. The evidence is unambiguous. And by the way, even NPR talks about that evidence. So the fact is, we know that what we have is a situation where this ongoing campaign of terror is about reallocating, redistributing, and reappropriating resources into state control. And there's no question that that's what happened in Maui. There's no question that's what's happening in Canada. And there's no question that that's what's happening in fires that are going on all around the world, remarkably in places where climate change activists say they're the most concerned with climate change. They're pumping CO2 into the air. So this hypocrisy is necessary to create the cognitive dissonance. Because when you sit there and you go, I don't even know what anybody stands for, what's going to happen is we're going to have more of these false events. What are they going to look like? I've talked about this before. We have been conditioned to accept that there is an alien threat. We now know that the Space Force has an appropriation because we're pretty sure there's going to be a hostile something coming from somewhere. Seth, over the last 6 months, and I encourage people to look at this back almost a year ago when I gave a speech at the Arlington Institute, I said, watch for the number of solar flares and near collision reports coming about asteroids and various objects from space. And I'm telling you, since I gave that speech, every week there's a proliferation of solar mass ejections that are going to disrupt communications, and then solar ejections that are going to disrupt satellites. And then, oh my God, we found an asteroid that we didn't know, and it's on a collision course with Earth. You don't do that advanced programming if you don't intend to have an event where you're going to blame the sun, or you're going to blame an asteroid, or you're going to blame something else for a series of events which are going to be sold as cataclysms. And the reason I do these interviews and have these conversations is it's very helpful to go back and say, oh my gosh, Dave actually told us that the asteroid was going to hit us. Well, I didn't tell you that. I told you that the messaging is not selectively used unless the intent is to use it. None of us give a shit about solar flares. Seth, you don't wake up every day going, I wonder what's going on with the solar flares. But I don't care what media you consume. You cannot look over the last year and find a month where you didn't have 3 or 4. It's going to disrupt communications. It's going to disrupt satellites. It's going to disrupt economic systems. Guess what? Every one of those solar flares came and went. And you know what happened in your life? Nothing. And you know what happened in the lives of everybody else? Nothing. And the reason why is because we live in a world that was designed with its magnetosphere to actually make sure that solar flares don't have a huge impact on us. And what have they been doing recently? Well, the most recent scientific publications are saying we're thinking that there's a degradation in the magnetic force of the Earth. Really? What's that story really about? That story is getting us ready for an attack. So I look at these weak signals, right? Solar flares, UFOs, now UAPs. We call them unidentified aerial phenomena. Why did we change the brand of UFO? Well, it turns out that there's a reason you change the brand, just like we changed the brand of flu to COVID. If you change the brand, now all of a sudden, you're not saying it's a UFO from some other place. An unidentified aerial phenomenon could be a giant blimp from China. It could be a satellite that's being launched at these horrifically bizarre frequencies right now. It could be all sorts of things. And we, the people, have no idea what is in the payload of SpaceX Falcon rocket launches. We're told it's communication satellites. You have no idea. No idea. And the fact is that we know that the unidentified aerial phenomenon notion was a branding transition to get us ready to accept a false flag event where an alien energy, an alien force, an alien something decided to hit a specific location. And you only run those stories because you're planning on executing the storybook.
So they're not really leaving this to, to the chance of one thing working, that they've got their layers and layers. And it's like, okay, if the lockdowns fail, the masking fails, the public doesn't fear this and they choose not to comply, they start rising up too much, then you just throw the next thing at them, then the next thing.
Oh, no question. I would not be surprised in October to have an alien attack. Now, what would that look like? It could be a North Korean nuke that we call an EMP, in which case we say, well, it was that. I wouldn't be surprised if we have this bizarre emission of a high energy beam from space, which we are told is coming from a quasi-intelligent asteroid or some other nonsense. And I wouldn't be surprised to see that hit a urban center where along with it, are you ready for this? There's probably some sort of pathogen that comes with it. So you might not have believed that you need the mask for one thing, but you do need the mask for something else. And by the way, they already tried that in New York this summer. The Toronto and northern Ontario fires, and then all across the Northern Territories and up into Alberta, those fires led New York to try to reinstitute are you ready for this? A face mask mandate for air quality because the air quality sucked from the fires. What's that trying to do? It's trying to normalize the use of face masks. Well, great news is New Yorkers, even the crazy New Yorkers that actually went along with 1.0, didn't fall for it because they actually realized that breathing is actually a kind of an interesting human imperative, and breathing with a mask sucks. So most people didn't fall for it. But the fact is, every one of these things, people need to look at the facts. The facts are that the playbook is being told to us. The facts are being laid out for us. Every one of them is being pre-announced, premeditated, and the audacity of the actors is such that they are market testing where they can trigger the largest fear response. And I think that the UFO thing wasn't working. It was supposed to work because remember, COVID brought us UFOs too. You got to remember that. COVID brought us UFOs. So the reason why I'm putting these things together is because they put them together. Right? The reason why I'm saying these things are related is because the criminal conspiracy put them out at the same time. That's why they're related. So we would expect that if one thing doesn't work, something else does. Please remember September of 2001. At the beginning of September, we had aerial phenomenon hitting things. And in the end of September, we had anthrax. Both of them brought to us by the United States government. Guess what? We are going to have a pathogen and an aerial phenomenon in round 2. You know why? Because that's their playbook. We will have it. They've already told us we're going to have it. So we shouldn't be surprised when it happens.
All right, folks, I've got a quick message for you. I have one simple question. If today you could no longer go purchase more food for your family, with the food stores that you have in your home, how long would you be able to feed your family? Would it be a week, 3 weeks, a month, 2 months, a year? This is a really important question, folks, that we have to be very realistic about because the elites are proactively trying to put us into a state of food crisis and a state of famine. I'm sure you've seen all of the different food processing plants and farms that are blowing up. You've got cattle dying by the tens of thousands. They're proactively trying to collapse our food system because they know if they can control our food, they can control us. And so one of the best ways to be outside of their control is to be able to have our own stores of food and to be able to produce our own food. So there's really two things I would recommend. One is having heirloom seeds that you can grow your own food with, making sure that they're non-GMO heirloom seeds, that way you can harvest your seeds this year, use them next year. You can use these seeds for generations. Literally, that's how it will work. The other thing, though, is this high quality storable food. This is food that's sitting somewhere. It's hidden in your basement, buried in your backyard, whatever it is. So that way, if there is a crisis, if there is an emergency, you might have 3 months set aside to get through that time period. And so for this, I would highly recommend a company called Heaven's Harvest. This is an amazing Christian-owned patriot company. And what they're doing is they're making high quality storable food. Again, a lot of the food companies, they say these food buckets, they're all about maximizing calories per dollar. They're filling the buckets with a bunch of filler and junk like sweet beverages, etc. But Heaven's Harvest, they focus on very high quality food that will last up to 25 years on the shelf. They also sell heirloom seeds. So you can buy all of your seeds, you can buy all of your storable food. And look, folks, personally, I would recommend having at least 3 months per person in your household, if not 6 months or even a year. Again, depends on your budget, but I would definitely make sure you have some seeds because those seeds could be worth their weight in gold, if not more in the future. So to go ahead and do this right now, go open up a new tab and go to heavensharvest.com. And if you use the promo code Seth, that's SETH, promo code Seth, you'll save 15% off of your entire order. So again, folks, the time is running out and you'd rather be 3 months or 1 year early than 1 day late. Again, heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth to save 15% today. Considering looking at the battle that we have this small group of what people will call the elites, the cabal, the deep state, whatever it is, a small group of power hungry, probably satanic psychopaths, right? That want to take control of the entire world, billions of people, to be enslaved under this one world order. And one of the great tools that they've used is brainwashing and psychological operations because they need us to go along with it to a certain degree. They can't, they don't have the technology or the power to control all of us, through boot and gun. They need us to buy into their system. But it seems like that's backfiring for a handful of reasons. You could say it was Trump in 2016. You could say it was the rise of independent media, the internet that backfired, whatever reason. So looking at where we're at right now, when you look at, let's call them the deep state for conversation's sake, representative of that group, do you feel like that they're acting from a position of strength or acting from a position of desperation and weakness at this point?
No question that they are a caged, rabid animal that's on its last gasp. Now, for those of you watching this in some tape delayed setting, what I would encourage you to do is take a look on YouTube at the scene that I'm about to describe. In the movie 300, there's a very, very, very beautiful scene. It's one of my favorite cinematic moments in all of cinema. And it is a moment where one of the 300 Spartans standing against the 1,000,000 Persians army at Hell's Gate at Thermopylae.
Our eyes bear witness to the grotesque spectacle coughed forth from the darkest corner of Xerxes' empire.
Spartan goes out and grabs a spear, and a war rhinoceros from the army of Xerxes is running towards that Spartan. And the Spartan strikes his side pose and heaves his spear, and it flies through the air and it goes into the head of the rhinoceros. And the rhinoceros keeps running. It keeps running and keeps running. And the Spartan stands his ground. He does not flinch. He doesn't move, and he doesn't even change his pose. He stands there, left foot forward, throwing arm still very clearly clenched. And he's standing there, and the rhinoceros runs and runs and runs and runs and runs. And what you see in this beautiful moment in the image is the rhino is running towards the Spartan, and the rhino's nose digs down into the ground, and it ends with the rhino dead at the toe of the Spartan. And in my speeches, I like to show that film and then ask the question, when did the rhino die? Did the rhino die when it stopped moving? Did it die when the spear went through its head? Did it die when it was drafted into service in Xerxes' army as a war rhino? And I have people raise their hand. When do you think the rhino died? Did it die when it stopped? Did it die when the spear went through its head? When did it die? And so I get everybody to get their hands up, and then I ask the question, is it possible that the rhino died the day it was taken off the savannah? Because rhinos are meant for the savannah. And when you actually take a living thing out of the created order where it belonged, it's already dead. Its life is already extinguished. Now, the reason I'm telling you that story, Seth, is because I think that the answer is the rhino's already dead. The New World Order is dead. And we actually should not be fearing a thing that's dead. Because the fact of the matter is, these individuals, whether it's the Yuval Hararis or the Klaus Schwabs, whether it is the Joe Bidens or the Hunter Bidens or the Kamala Harrises or the anybody else, the Bill Gateses of the world, they made a decision in the 1980s and early 1990s. They made a decision that there were too many people. And so they had to decide how to kill off a segment of the population. Now, when you make a decision that says, I'm going to, through the cunning use of injections, I'm going to do it through the cunning use of food supplies, I'm going to do it through the cunning use of migration or war or anything else. When you decide that you are going to actually achieve your objective by extinguishing the lives of others, you stopped living. And I think we would do ourselves a massive favor if we sat back for a moment and contemplated the fact that we are reacting to the activities of a quivering, reflex-only, no cognitive function corpse. Now, that doesn't mean the corpse can't create damage. It doesn't mean that it can't flail about. But it does mean it is not to be feared. Because it turns out that if you walk away from that rabid caged animal, if you walk away from the rhino charging with a spear through its brain, if you walk away from the Klaus Schwabs who are railing against the fact that we ever even have fashion, his latest rant, the fact of the matter is, just stand your ground. Because the rhino can't get you. It's already dead. And I wish that particularly people of faith would hear this message, because I am really, really surprised at how many people who tell me that they have faith in some sort of giant cosmic order still cower in fear at AI or at the New World Order, at whatever else. Who cares? It's dead. It has been declared dead already. It actually knows it's dead. And it's doing its last gasp to try to save itself. And guess what? It's dead. And we would do ourselves a great favor by going, look at it flail. Look at it thrash about. Look at it do its nonsense. Look at it still trying to run, still trying to do the weird things it's going to do. But it's dead. And we don't need to sit there and go, well, how many more spears do we need to throw through its brain? It's already dead.
Such an important point. I think it's maybe it's the most important point for us right now, because
Yep.
I believe that fear is one of their greatest control mechanisms. And I think
The
that
only tool they have, Seth, it's the only tool they have. And if you get rid of that, none of it matters.
Yeah. And it reminds me, so my daughter, who's turning 3 next month, she has all these little toys, and these toys you wind up, and like she has this little chick that she loves. You wind it up and it goes, kind of pitter patters around the floor, but it stops. And that's, I've heard also someone else describe it in that way before. It's almost like it's this giant dial that was set into motion a long time ago with these particular plans. But it's like the people that wound up the toy, the entities that set the dial into motion, are already dead. And what we're witnessing is just the motion that was already set in, the dominoes that are already falling.
Exactly right.
That have lost the entity and the power and everything behind them. It just, and you can almost see it when you look at what's happening with different things. You see, like, no one's fearing that. Like why are they still pushing this thing? It's almost as if they'll come out with a press conference after something happens, and it's like the event happened, it did not have the desired effect, yet they still act like it had the exact effect that they wanted it to. Right? Because their playbook is already written.
Well, and I think I love the analogy, the wind up tour. I actually have those pullback things that were the pullback cars that you'd wind up and then you'd zip them across the floor. And I still think they're amazing. And I'm 56 and I still love playing with them. But now I'm a grandpa, so I get to, because I now have 2 grandchildren and I'm getting to be a kid all over again. But listen, I mean, that's the fact. The fact is, and here's the thing. If we recognize the fact, right? And remember, if you have part of your plan is there's 7.5, 8 billion people on the planet, let's get rid of 1 billion. If that's part of your plan, you're already dead. People aren't going along with your plan. That plan is not going to be a plan that works. I used to find it amusing. Now I don't even find it amusing. I find it tragic. I grew up in a very what I would call socially conscious conservative environment. What that means is that we were historically trained to be pacifists. We were historically trained to be part of the peace church movement. And I find it fascinating that my family and my extended family have embraced the political party under the Obama administration and under the Biden administration, who have unleashed more acts of war, and specifically acts of primary aggression war. These are not defensive acts. These are not looking out for somebody else. These are actually instituting wars for their own mercenary purposes. And I love the fact that no matter who it is in my family, not one of them can live through the hypocrisy of saying that they valued, allegedly, the church's stance on nonviolence and peace, but somehow or another can vote for people who, for example, under the Obama administration, led to more U.S.-based assassinations than in the sum of all other U.S. history. The drone strike program under Obama became the deadliest destabilizing force that we've had. And we still have people who go, he got the Nobel Peace Prize. What? This guy was a mass murdering psychopath. But because of the color of his skin, he's allegedly a benighted saint. Here's the problem. The problem is anytime you see that level of cognitive dissonance, you know that the programming is meant exactly to your point, to hypnotize and to control a population where they suspend their own critical thought and they suspend their own view of reality, including people who, listen, if I described the events that led up to Ukraine, which By the way, I did a show on a year before Ukraine, forecasting exactly the events that were going to happen in Ukraine. So talk about tea leaf reading. Nailed that one. But I did that event. If I actually sat down in the churches I grew up in and said, who do you think would be responsible for the description of what I just told you? They would immediately say, oh, that's the war hawk Republicans. No, it's your tree-hugging left Democrat. That's who brought you that campaign of terror. And that kind of thing. Remember what's happening. The Bible refers to this as having your conscience seared. Now, most people don't understand what that specifically means. Searing a thing is something that's done with a hot iron. And what it is actually something that doesn't impede the flow. It actually blocks the flow. So a seared conscience isn't a conscience that still kind of works. A seared conscience is a conscience that doesn't flow at all anymore. And we are living in a world where we live among a society with seared consciences. I like to remind people of their own language sometimes, because I think many people of faith forget that we actually were told that these kinds of things happen. The whole reason why the Old Testament is filled with the minor prophets is because this happened over and over and over and over and over again. We've had Anthony Fauci 4.0, 5.0, 6.0, and all you have to do is read the book of Judges and you realize this has been around for a long time. But the problem is we're still not learning. We're still giving into fear. And we're still giving into the notion that we are somehow this tiny little population of helpless people who all we are is just the last ragtag band of people standing for freedom. No, we're not. You know what God's message was every single time in the Old Testament when somebody goes, I think I'm the only one. And God would go like, no, there's a lot more. But I feel like I'm the only one. No, there's a lot more. What's the point? The point is we need to stand together. Freedom of assembly is the basis of democracy. Freedom of speech, basis of democracy. What we need to be doing is just continuing to gather, continuing to have conversations, continuing to remind ourselves that the old paradigm is dead. And when it lashes out and Whole Foods says you have to have a mask to go into Whole Foods, don't go into Whole Foods. Don't. When somebody says, well, you have to have this to get into that, great. Don't. Just don't. Stand like the Spartan and watch the rhino die at your feet. That's the only thing we have to do this time.
And I'll actually post show. I'll put that clip in there. Actually, I found it as we were talking. I was going to play it. It's one of my favorite movies. Also, it's for so many reasons. But so looking at, and this might be a difficult question to answer exactly, but I love asking you the difficult questions. So this beast system, this new world order system, which is this giant rhino that was charging at mankind and then had a spear thrown into its skull, say 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it's still sliding towards us. And for a lot of people, even a lot of very awake people, they're still frightened of the rhino. They just know the details of the rhino. They know how many horns it has. They know how much it weighs. They know, the direct path. And so maybe they're even more frightened of the rhino because they see it so clearly. How do you think this final stage plays out in terms of when do you think that rhino will come to a screeching halt?
Yeah.
And people will then look at it and say, that's a dead rhino and it has no power. When does that event happen?
I actually think it might have already happened, Seth. I think it might have already happened. You might know this. I know many people do. I gave a speech in May at the European Union Parliament. I was supposed to have 45 minutes. That 45 minutes, because people arrived late, because all kinds of other things happened, that 45 minutes was reduced to 21 minutes. And I delivered a speech, and I called my beautiful wife, Kim, afterwards. And she had gotten up at whatever it was, 3:00 in the morning, to hear my speech. And she goes, "How do you think it went?" And I said, "Oh, it was terrible. I only had 21 minutes." And there was this long pause, and she goes, "Your speech was perfect. It was the 21 minutes that will change the world." Seth, that video now has been seen, based on the last report I just got, 4 billion times. It is the most downloaded video in human history. And guess what? One fact check organization, only one, has even come out trying to dispel the facts of what I said. Mainstream media hasn't. And by the way, the fact check organization that Facebook uses to fact check that speech actually didn't fact check the speech. They were absolutely silent on the material points of the speech, which had to do with the fact that Ralph Barrick in 2005 said that coronavirus was going to be a biowarfare enabling technology. Guess what they didn't dispute? That, which is the sum and substance of the point of what I was saying. What they do is they try to recast the stories of the scientific papers from the 1950s and create this smokescreen that allegedly says that what I said and how I characterized the paper is incorrect. And the fact of the matter is, I'm just reading from the paper. All of that said, if one guy, and I love the fact that I have the name David because it just makes the metaphor even easier. If one guy sitting at the European Parliament can throw a rock, that the only defense that anybody can make against that rock, the only defense, is a pathetic fact checker that has to be promoted on Facebook on the back of my post. Because the only way they can get their message out is to ride on my coattails. Why do I think the rhino is dead? Because it's dead. There has been no credible response to that speech. And let me tell you what's coming up. On September the 13th, you know where I am again? In front of the European Union Parliament. Listen, people, I know it's hard to wrap your head around this because you still see the power of the reflex of the behemoth beast. I get it. But there's also a reason why there's a Seth Holhouse, and there's a reason why there's a David Martin in the world right now. And the reason is that sometimes you need to look at the facts and you need to ask yourself a simple question. What is the arsenal I have standing behind me? What is the massive media engine I have to promote my video? Oh, that's right. None. Except the one thing that they can never possess, and that is the truth. The truth needs no defense. The truth needs no promotion. The truth, like a raging fire, will spread around the globe, and 4 billion people will watch a bald guy from Virginia indict the criminals in front of the European Parliament, and that will be broadcast by the European Union Parliament on their TV. Why do I think the beast is dead? Because I happen to know it is. I've taken the pulse of it, and it's dead. So, yes, are we still going to be confronted with challenges? Absolutely, we will. But remember that if you know that the thing that's coming at you with terror is a thing you don't have to fear, then its power goes away the minute you stop fearing it. So don't fear it. Because there is absolutely nothing to fear other than the inadequacy and the selfishness and the greed that you have within yourself. because the only thing that they can ever take from you is the illusions and perceptions that you've decided stand in the way of your essence. You don't need to go on a cruise. You don't need a job you already hate. You don't need to get on an airplane that is flying to a place you don't need to go. You don't need to do any of the things that they're going to use to coerce you. None of them. You don't need any of those. You can stand like the Spartan and watch the rhino's nose go into your sandal and never, ever, ever flinch.
What a powerful way to finish this. And it's interesting because we don't do interviews that often, but I have to say that I'm always just so excited to step into this realm with you and just see where it goes, because it never stays in the ordinary. It never stays in the, well, here's my latest report. It always just goes straight to the soul of things. And that's where I prefer to live. And if I could have only these kinds of interviews on this show, it's all I'd want to do.
Well, Seth, one day, the threat that we've made, which is we're going to actually sit across the table from each other. Next time we do it, let's make sure we do it face to face.
Let's do it. And let's give ourselves 3 hours for it. And one thing I will say is that, I'm watching and I'm paying attention to a lot of different narratives and how to make sense of this. And fundamentally, I do think I'm somebody that has the faith to enable me to look at this and not cower in fear. Right? My face is out in the public, and that's probably an indication of that. But I think that it's not easy. And there's a lot of people that try to say, okay, here's why we shouldn't be scared. But this particular message of reminding us that the beast, the rhino, is already dead. And what we're seeing is just the inertia that was behind it before, before it lost its life, I think is such a powerful message that it's the exact message we need to hear right now. And so, one thing I will say is that for anybody that's made it this far into the interview, share this interview. Share it with your friends, with your family, with your fellow patriots.
Play it in churches, play it in schools, like
there you go.
Put it on screens. This is what we need to arm ourselves with for the coming storm, because there is no storm. It's just bluster.
Yeah, it's exactly. And I'll finish with one thing. There was this dream that I had, and I'll try to simplify it, but it was the most frightening dream I've ever had in my life. And basically I was part of this, I entered into this dark city where they had these storms around the city that everyone was fleeing the storms, and they ran into this city. They thought the city representative of the government systems was going to protect them. But once everyone was in the city, you saw these riot troops marching, and they put gates over every entrance of the city. And then what they did was they unlocked these warehouses, and these demon beastly creatures that were 2 stories tall just started ravaging the streets and tearing people limb from limb. And I rose above it. And I floated way up above the city and up above everything. I saw this happening in all these big cities around the world. But then I realized as I went higher up, I went above the clouds and above the storm, and it was this beautiful sun. It was this beautiful, just magnificent scene. And what I realized was that even the clouds, the storm clouds themselves, were fake, and that they were an illusion created to make people rush into the arms of the government, where the government would then tear them limb from limb. And it was the fear of that led people to their demise. And it was what you're describing really reminds me of that, and the importance of us not being afraid.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I can't wait for our sit down when we're face to face.
Exactly. David, where's the best place for people to follow what you're doing and to support what you're doing?
Well, Kim and I have made a commitment to support this with our lives and our treasure and everything. And so what we encourage people to do is share this message as much as you can. I now have a pretty big presence on Twitter. So Dr. D Martin World. I won't get that right. You'll put the right one up on there. But you know, I continue to do a lot of public appearances. I'm trying to increase those whenever it is face to face. So I'm doing a big speaking circuit through Europe in the coming couple weeks. I've really tried to commit to being connected to people. I don't think that the internet is our answer. I think it's helpful to get messages around, but I'm advocating more and more assembly of people just because I know we're stronger when we actually see each other standing together. And so I'm trying to do as much of that as possible. So the best thing to do is get your community together, figure out a way to, host a movie screening of American Revolution, have an evening when we have this kind of a conversation. And the easy thing to do is find an excuse to get together with people. And the likelihood is a big enough group of people and I'll be there. Because it really is, we need to be together now. We need to actually turn off the entirety of this digital addiction that people have gotten into. We need to remember that if it means that we drive to places, fly to places, ride our bikes to places, whatever it is, keep getting together because that's where the magic happens. So all my typical online stuff is there, davidmartin.world. Kim and my stuff at fullylive.world and the fullyliveacademy.com. You can find us a bunch of places, but the best place to find us is in your living room or in your church or in your community center or in your school or in your venue, wherever it is. That's the best place to find us because we belong connected to people. That's where we belong.
Well, thank you so much, David. I really appreciate what you're doing. And it's great to have you on. And I can't wait to get one of the in-person ones set up.
All right. Very good.
Take
care, Seth.
Thank you.